Kev, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great.
It is wonderful to have you here. You and I have been threatening to do this for what now? About a year and some change, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been a while. So finally, here we are. I always try to start off somewhere where we can get our audience to know who you are, where you come from, all of that good stuff. I know about your passion for education, so talk to us about that. Where did it all start? How did you find yourself in this path that has led to one of the most important jobs in the world, I think, but one of the least paid? Oh, that's my education joke. Anyway, tell us about yourself, Kevin.
Well, my background in education definitely started as a kid. Both my parents were and are teachers. I have grandparents that were teachers, heavily invested in Adventist education. My great uncle helped start Okanagan Christian School, where I graduated back in 1908.
Oh,
yeah.
You graduated in 1908.
No, he started the school in 1908.
I had to throw it in there.
My great grandfather, Russell, donated some land out in Alberta, which they started an Adventist school, and that moved and eventually became Burman University.
Oh.
Yeah, so both sides of my family are listed in Adventist education history here in Canada, which I discovered recently. I have an uncle professor. I have cousins that are teachers and missionary teachers. I'm married to a teacher. So kind of the lifestyle growing up. I've always been in school.
Yeah.
I've always been around school, understanding it. And I think this kind of that momentum and understanding of that way of life, that goal of education, the joy of education, and a lot of my people I look up to are teachers.
Yeah.
So just kind of carrying that forward. I mean, my brother and sister want nothing to do with education, but they're really good teachers when they instruct and help. So it's kind of a family thing, I suppose.
Yeah. So I've heard many teachers say at some point in their career or training, there was also a couple of teachers along the way who had a great impact in their lives. Do you have people like that in your journey of education, and how did they impact you?
Oh yeah, when I was teaching, I have a little poster I made called My Teaching Heritage, and I list those people out as a way to be reminded and to give honor to them. And so in high school, it comes back to Mr. McMullen. He was my science teacher and PE teacher. Mrs. Gerber, who's my Bible and science teacher as well. In university, I had some amazing professors. Dr. Jewell was my education dean. In grad school, I have Rabbi Laura, who was the director of my program. And of course my dad, he was my ultimate teacher hero.
Yeah.
He taught me a little bit in high school as well before he passed away. And then, of course, I've had amazing professors like Dr. Kelly at Trinity Western, Dr. Etherington, right?
Yeah.
And these people not only showed and taught me how to be a teacher, but they showed character. And they showed what it means to be a good educator, what it means to live a life that people learn from.
Yeah.
And so I try to be like them in many ways.
Congratulations, by the way. I read your thesis, which is fantastic. I hope that the director will find a way to link that on the screen so people can read that if they're interested in it. We're going to talk about it here for a bit. Now, when I was going through your thesis, it felt to me like the foundation you were starting from was a realization of the landscape of religion in Canada, where you're saying it's not only just Christians out there. You have a growing number of other people from other religions. Talk to us about that for a second, Gav. Let's start right there, because you went from there to talk about how then do you create an educational platform that caters for everyone? So let's start there. Best place to start at the beginning.
It's a very good place to start. Yes. Yeah. So my master's program is in Indigenous and Interreligious Studies at Vancouver School of Theology. And so being that it's a Master of Arts, there's a little bit more wiggle room in what you do your thesis on. So I combined world religion and education. Mm-hmm. And so kind of the foundational reality that I kind of hook people in or kind of build the logic of the whole need for religious education is, well, religion is changing, as in the Canadian population is changing. Christianity is declining. Judaism is also declining a little bit. Islam and Hinduism, Buddhism are on the rise. Yeah. And so how do we understand that? How do we live well in a changing religious landscape of Canada? And of course, it can be expanded to the States and other Western countries as well. How do we live well? How do we understand that Canada has more of a Christian history, right? We have Christmas, we have Easter. So we have a bit more Christian tendencies just because of our history. So how do we understand that along with, well, everyone has a rights, everyone has freedoms, everyone's valued. How do we understand citizenship a little bit?
Yeah. If I can read something you wrote here that I found very profound. You said in a 20-year time frame, we've seen a rise in the Muslim population from 2% to 4.9%. And in the Hindu population from 1% to 2.3%. And in the Sikh population from 0.9% to 2.1%. So we're in this religious landscape where Christianity, Judaism looks like it's going down, or maybe it is. I guess it is. Numbers don't quite lie, do they now? And then you have all the other religious experiences also coming up. And now you have children who are coming from these families seeking now an education. Now, your specialty, you were teaching what, grade 12?
Well, I'm trained for middle school, high school. So when we first met, I was middle school, grade 6, 7. But then I also got to teach high school Bible, which is another one of my teaching areas. Yes. Yeah. So I was kind of doing a bit of everything. And so it was really enjoyable in that way.
Yeah. That seems to be the norm with education. You know, it's like a bit here, a bit there, a bit here.
Especially in a small school, they can put you. So I know my last year at teaching, I was doing grade 4, 5 PE. It was grade 6, 7 homeroom. Then I was high school religious studies. And then I was the assistant athletic director.
Oh, my.
And it was all the stuff I loved doing. So I enjoyed it. Yeah. I got to trade away my French class. I got to trade away some of my English classes. And I got to do all the stuff I liked.
You were living the dream.
Yeah, it was pretty fun.
You say here also, by 2036, the number of people affiliated with non-Christian religions could almost double and possibly account for 13 to 16% of Canada's population. That's a big deal.
Yeah, those numbers were posted just last year from Statistics Canada, so it's not like I'm making it up. They did the research, and I'm just using the numbers, and that projection is quite awe-inspiring. Yeah, religious nuns, or this spiritual religious group, is growing, and then it's even more hyper-focused here in BC. Just about half our population here in BC is not religious, compared to Quebec, which is majority Catholic. Yeah. So even those statistics, when you come down to a province level, is even more crazy here in BC. But across Canada, you see that trend. Yeah. Canada is mostly grows by immigration, and the biggest areas of immigration are India, Philippines, and I think China. There was another one. Yeah. And so that's bringing a lot of the influx. That's right. That's part of the reason religion in Canada has survived, is it's brought in by immigrants. Yeah. there was a famous statement that religion would die in Canada by the 21st century. But the guy that wrote that didn't account for immigration. And so he came back later. He's like, actually, I was correct in a way, but I was incorrect because I didn't realize religion would be brought into Canada and sustained by all this immigration.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's also part of the reality is the people that are coming to Canada are bringing Sikhism, Hinduism, are huge, growing in BC.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like the town we met, Williams Lake, population of 12,000.
Yeah.
1/3 is Sikh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they currently have a Sikh mayor, right? So it is a huge thing. I was just in Abbotsford, massive Sikh population.
Yeah.
They have 2 huge temples right across each other.
Yeah.
Right? So it is part of the religious landscape that it is changing.
Yeah.
And so how do we live well among that? That's a key question I ask and try to answer.
Yeah. So let me dial it back a bit here if I can try that. A fair amount of people might agree that immigration has its advantages. Okay, looking at it from a more social perspective, I think it is good because it gets people exposed to other societies, other cultures, how other people think and see the world around them. I think that is ultimately good for our common shared humanity. But how can that be a problem in the education setting? How does having all the different people with different worldviews, how does it become problematic? Because, I can see someone might be watching this and thinking, okay, I hear you guys, but no, there's no problem here. In your view, Kev, why is it problematic? Where are the problems of having people from different religious worldviews in one educational system? Like, talk to me about the problems.
Not all religions see the same thing, understand the same way. So they have different problems. Like Christianity, the problem is sin, but that's not a problem in another religion.
True.
And so the solution to the problem, to the way you live, is all very different. And so how the tension then comes in, well, whose message, whose way of living, how do we understand that? And in Canada, the dominant voice has been the Christian voice.
Yeah.
And so there's some reaction against that. Well, how do we create space for these other religious voices? And it is hard. Sometimes it causes tension, but that's why it has to be done in a relational way, where if I actually know my Muslim neighbor and there's a tension, I can actually, in a relational way, work through it.
Yeah. I mean, just to put it out there, it's been on the media, it's been everywhere that you have people who are not comfortable with the idea of anyone who identifies as LGBTQ plus in an educational system. I see that as one of the issues, So you have a child here who's here for an education, but that tag that we stick on each other that seems to override our shared humanity then becomes a problem. So you have that tag, and then you have, oh, you are Christian. Oh, no, you are Muslim. Oh, you are, and it's a problem.
Yeah, we oversimplify. We create fear. We create space that fear can grow and flourish, right? And I think in Christian tradition, we say perfect love casts out fear. Well, love is action. Love is based on knowing.
Yeah.
And so that's a Christian view of, well, if I know you, it's going to be a lot harder to hate you. I may disagree.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it too, is we distance because we allow fear. There's a lot of fear in the media. The United States goes through rungs of anti-Muslim. They did, there's a lot of those politicians around the world that use fear to get elected. Yeah. And I think there has to be a pushback for that for sure, because school is a weird place because it's responsive to a community. It shows the community values, but then it also can respond and lead a community. We can teach what we want for the future, what we hope are our ideals, even if they're not fully realized.
Yeah.
So school, whether public or private, has this back and forth where, my value is this, so I want my kid to learn it.
Yeah.
But then professional educators and leaders are like, well, actually, we want to move past this issue. We want to learn to be better. We want to learn the reasons and the context so kids can not have these issues in the future.
Yeah. So I found your thesis quite interesting because I look in the community around and I see we have Catholic schools, in the private schools domain, we have Catholic schools, you have Adventist schools, it seems like each denomination will have their own school, which they use to also educate people about their religious worldview. That's fine. But you are suggesting that, hey, how about an interfaith educational system? To me, that's a big idea. That's a huge idea. So in your mind, you are envisioning a setting where people from different religious backgrounds can come to one place and they all feel like they belong.
Yeah, I guess that's a high ideal I've picked up from Vancouver School of Theology, because that's definitely how they operate. And it comes in the difference of understanding that interreligion is different than comparative religion.
Talk to us about that.
And that is an important distinction. So I say it kind of brutally, but comparative religion is like dissecting a dead dog, whereas interreligion is like living with the dog.
Oh my goodness!
Right?
Yeah.
So comparative is academically safe because it's distant. I can read your texts, I can understand your beliefs, but I don't have to understand the lived experiences. I don't have to engage. Because public education often doesn't want to get into the realm of changing students' belief structures. There's a lot of pushback against that.
Yeah.
So you can go into all of education theory, but interreligious studies is trying to understand, well, what is the lived expression, right? You can claim these titles, like you said, tags, but what does that actually mean in a daily lived life? Yeah. What does it mean to be a Sikh person beyond the turban, beyond the outward appearance? Yeah. What's the view? What's the sometimes we talk about food. Okay, yeah, food's important, but what's the worldview? What's the framing? How do you see yourself, your vocation in relation to the divine? Yeah. And so I like interfaith or interreligious studies because it goes into that deep lived piece. And then you can do the cross studies of, okay, if you're a Christian woman and a Muslim woman, you're both women, but how does your religion change that view? Yeah. Or, whatever you want to cross over. And so it's getting into the more nitty gritty. It's getting more into the full expression. So it's a more involved kind of approach. I love how you say it. Just say it again. So interreligious. Religious is like what, by the way? Living with a dog. Yeah. Whereas comparative religion is like dissecting a dead dog, right? Yeah. You can get information from dissection, but the lived reality, the character, the quirks, the smell, the hair being left everywhere, you're going to miss that out, which is important. Yeah. Right? In the experience of a dog. Yeah. But in the experience of religion, it's even more important. Yeah. So comparative religion misses out on the lived experience. Generally because it's more academically safe because it's distant. Yeah. Right? Yeah. But then it's missing out on that shared piece. Yeah. Because I can keep you over here and understand your beliefs at an arm's length. Yeah. But not challenge or see myself through that. Yeah. I mean, I can put you at a distance and study you and, critique and, use my own worldview to understand yours. But on the other side, that's more involved. I have to deal with the dog hair. And I have to, understand that if I leave you at home alone for this long, you're going to wreck my furniture. That's me taking out some frustration on a dog. And that's one of the reasons I love Vancouver School of Theology, or just VST, if I say it that way, is my program director is Rabbi Laura, so a Jewish female rabbi teaching at a Christian school. We had instructors from every religion come and share some of, not just the belief structure, but their experience.
Yeah.
And then the other part of my program was directed by a Cree Reverend, Dr. Ray. Awesome guy.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things I've really taken on from VST is I've had those experiences. I've been invited to step into an engagement into these other religions, not denying my own. I often use the image of when humans go to the moon. They were on the moon, but they didn't stop being human. But they got to look back and see the earth for the first time. And so that's been kind of my experience is when I've been invited to step into these other faiths, I get to have these experiences. But then I look back at my own Christianity and being like, oh, it's way more beautiful than I realized.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's actually made me a better Christian. Right?
That's nice,
my experience has been, okay, I see the beauty and these amazing people. Well, what is it like for me? How does that come back to my experience?
Yeah. So let's do what you're saying here, Kev, where let's get into what it looks like. Okay. Because you've looked at it for a while, you've written about it. What does it look like in a class setting, an educational system to have an interfaith? Is that the right word?
Yeah, you can use that.
Interfaith or interreligious educational system, something that caters for everyone, that gets into, what it looks like on a Monday kind of thing. This is how it actually functions. There's a philosophical, again, we were talking before the cameras were rolling, that everywhere you go, there's an old German guy who has thought about it. There's a philosophical approach that you base your thesis on. What's the fellow's name, by the way?
Axel Honneth.
Yes. Talk to us about his philosophy, his worldview, and how it fits into how you're building this system.
Yeah, so I use his theory called the theory for the struggle of recognition, and I expand and kind of add some pieces to it. And his theory looks at, well, how do we recognize people? And he uses three main areas, so love or relational, mutual relationships.
Yeah.
Solidarity, which is your standing or your value in a community. And then law. So you're standing before the law that is supposed to be neutral in front of everyone.
Yeah.
So when one of those three areas isn't recognizing you, he says that that's a justification for a change. So if you look at, for instance, in Canada, First Nations, right? They weren't allowed to be in a relation. They were taken.
Okay.
They weren't equally before the law. Like they only been allowed to vote, I think, since the 80s. And they didn't have a place in community. So you can look at that and see, these are the areas that we have misrecognized. And so in his theory, it's not perfect. It's kind of simplistic. It doesn't get into all the finite details. Not being recognized doesn't always mean you're suffering. But it allows us to describe and then also to evaluate to move forward. Like, okay, well, we've recognized, we have Indigenous days. We are starting to build those areas back for those people that have had a terrible time, right? Put it mildly. But you can also apply it to a school setting where how do we recognize students? And then he uses the word struggle, and I follow some other philosophers who remove the word struggle as in we can affirm, we can give the gift of affirmation. So students don't have to struggle for these things. We can create an environment where their relationships, their mutual relationships are recognized and supported. They have equal value in the school, and they're equally before school rules.
Yeah, so that's a big thing, Kev, because being someone of color, to use a term that is used in this country, I fight for recognition, to say, hey, I am here also. I'm a human being, like I've attended seminars or classes where you take a class for the entire academic year and your professor doesn't even try to learn your name. That's a big deal to me. I mean, it just says, no, this person probably is not interested in recognizing who I am as a person. And so as simplistic as this philosophical approach can be, I think it's valuable, just to say, I see you, I recognize you, you are a human being, which is very important in education, I imagine. Because how do you teach, how do you educate someone when you don't recognize them for who they are?
Oh, and exactly. And like I said, too, being schools that are responsive to communities, but also finding ways to lead, if we teach through these methods and understand this theory, we could build kids up to not only have it, but to go on and to live it when they graduate. And that's kind of one of the hopes of education, is that it can instill values into students that they will carry as adults. Yeah,
you wrote here that Axel Honneth, that's the theorist's name, by the way, you said his definition of a good life includes being recognized through love, respect, and solidarity. To be able to get to a place where you say, oh, I as a human being, I am loved, I am respected, and someone gets me. Okay, no one dismisses me. There's a whole lot of dismissing that's happening out there. We spoke about what happened to the indigenous population in Canada. There's so many people out there who will say, wow, that was years ago.
Yeah.
Come on, let's move on from that now.
Yeah, and part of this as well is not only is it giving you a place and understanding, but as he shows, it's self-affirming. Mm-hmm. When you are equally before the law, you feel that you have a duty, an obligation. If I'm held to a standard, well, then I must have something to hold to.
Yeah.
And so these areas also create the fullness of who you are. Part of his thinking that I agree with and use a lot is that you become fully who you are through the interactions with others.
Yeah.
So when you affirm me by saying you are valuable, I get to have you on my podcast, I have something of value.
Yeah.
Right? And so, but if we didn't have the interaction, I wouldn't have had that moment of I have something of value. And so that not only is it creating or showing a society of how you can be part of a country, of a city, of a school, which is where I take the theory, but it also allows you to fully develop, to fully see yourself. He uses the word particularities, all the little parts of you.
Yeah.
Right? And so I expand his theory also to include religion, that we have to recognize through religion as well.
Let's talk about that one. That's a prickly one, because religion, at least the way it is right now, the very things they use to identify themselves are the things that separate them from others. To say, I am Catholic because, and then you say A, B, C, D, E, F, G, because that then makes you different from the Baptist or the Lutheran or, the Pentecostal and so on. How do you then in a public educational system bring different religions together, and you also, as he said, where is it? Come on, come to me. Recognize through love, respect, and solidarity.
Because it's not based on agreeance. I think we've cheapened it to, I have to agree with you before I like you.
Yeah.
And that's not that's a cheap way of loving somebody, of being in a relationship. It might make it easier that we agree on these things, therefore. It's like, but then are you really in a relationship, or are you just in agreeance? And I think that's a big key piece that his theory helps bring out is, well, what does it really mean to affirm somebody in their particularities?
Yeah.
He never talks about you have to agree with them. But your value in this community can be you're Muslim, I'm Christian, but we still have value as people that live in this town. We still have equal standing before the law, which has not always been the case, right? In Canadian law, you're treated differently if you're Indigenous.
Yeah.
They have Indigenous courts, but there's still a lot of tension in that way.
Yeah.
Because they're under the Indian Act. And so how do we reconcile that and understand, well, we can be equal through our differences? So that's why the solidarity and the law piece are very important.
Yeah. I feel like it seems to me like it sounds good. What does it look like, to be equal through our differences? Because even the law, it seems to me like, we say, here is a simple law, between point A and point B, you are going to drive at 100 k's an hour. And then they catch me, like they always do, doing 140 k's an hour. And they take away my license, they take away my car, they throw me behind prison. I don't feel recognized. Like, can we be, is it, the laws, are they not supposed to bring us together? To make us travel nicely through this highway of life? And could I extend that argument to say religious laws are supposed to do that also? Say, okay, like the Christian, thou shalt not kill. Then you leave your wife with me, you trust that I will not kill her, because we have this same law that holds us together. But if we don't share the same law, how can we then live equally?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying it's easy. And obviously in Canada, we have process by democracy, so majority is the way that we answer that in Canada and in quite a few countries, where the majority of us agree to this, you know, in the systems, and you can get into political theory, whether it's good or bad.
Bad.
Yeah, like some people want election reform and all that. Okay, let's talk about it for sure. So it is hard work. It is difficult because if you're coming into the conversation with a different worldview, but we both live in the same city, we both have the same mayor, and our mayor is trying to understand. And this is actually one of the case studies I bring to the students. Yeah. Early on in my because I develop a curriculum plan, and this is actually one of the things I bring is if you were the mayor and you had these two religious differences, trying to understand how would you work and reconcile that. That is part of the work of politicians. Yeah. Is we have diversity. Okay, where do we come into commonality? And I think that's very important through equal. Like if you get pulled over for speeding, well, somebody who's not African should also get pulled over for speeding. Like that shouldn't differentiate. Yeah. Not saying it doesn't. Yeah. Unfortunately. But it shouldn't. It shouldn't, yeah. But that's the work of relation. That's the work of politicians. That's the work of leadership. But we can bring it to, I can be part of that. I can get to know my neighbor who's religiously different. Yeah. So that when something happens, I'm not up in an uproar. That I don't become part of the problem. Yeah. Let me throw a situation at you. You have two students in class. One is Muslim. The other one is from a very fundamental Christian family. The Muslim comes to this lesson you are teaching, and their worldview is Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the last messenger and the greatest messenger of the Almighty God. The Christian comes into that classroom and they're saying, oh, Jesus the Messiah is the Savior. In fact, he is God. How do you work through that in a classroom setting? You have two students, different, opposing worldviews. How would you do that? Well, the big piece is the lead up to a lesson like that. Yeah. It's setting the foundation, the principles of interfaith dialogue, and finding ways to practice, okay, what are our disagreements? Obviously, a Christian and a Muslim disagree on some key things, but does that mean they can't live peacefully or enjoy each other's relationships or understand and affirm each other? And I think it's a hard lesson for kids to learn because we don't see it. Yeah. We don't see that affirmation through difference because it's not really required of us anymore. If I don't like you, I just go to another church. Right? Or if I don't like you, I'll just go to my little silo echo chamber over here online on this subreddit, and I don't have to worry about you anymore. Yeah. Right? And so it is difficult because it's not really, it seems like it's the norm anymore. There are historical incidences where it was the norm. Like Muhammad was very kind to Jews and Christians, and some of the first interfaith historically actually came from the Islamic Empire.
Yes.
Because they had many Jews and Christians living under them in Mecca and in Baghdad and these places.
Yeah. Yeah, like Baghdad was just a major center for education, learning, philosophy, and you had people coming from all walks of the faith community. Like I often say to people who are, people say, oh, Rumi. I say, oh, dear, I've forgotten that Rumi was Muslim.
Yeah.
Like they found a way. It wasn't perfect, but they found a way. And interfaith seems to be not in our vocabulary anymore.
No, it's something that's been removed because in the history of Canada, for example, being Christian was the way you got connections. It was the way you got involved in the community. Especially if you look at American history, you had to be part of a church to enter politics when the colonies were around. So it became politicized, it became a form of easiness. You can go back to the Roman Empire when it became Christian.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, everyone became Christian because it was the way to rise up the social ladder.
Yeah, yeah.
And so there is that recognition, and that's a very key piece. And so part of what I talk about too is diagnosing, understanding what are the key voices. So in Adventist school, we talk about the key voice in this school is Adventism. Mm-hmm. And so affirming and recognizing, well, the key voice in this community may be Sikh, or the key voice, and that's part of the process of understanding the context. It's like, okay, who gets the louder default voice?
Yeah, yeah.
Who gets the automatic say? And so context is big.
Yeah, so the key voice does not take away from the other voices. It just says, this is the key voice here. This is the loudest voice. But it's speaking in a context of other voices. And what it seems to me like what tends to happen is that the other voices are eliminated and that one voice becomes the one voice for everything. And I think you wrote about something here quite interesting where you're talking about the world religion curriculum. That word didn't come out as pleasantly from my African mouth. So if you have a curriculum, there we go, it came out now, of world religion, that plays down other religions, like, where it talks down upon them than just to lift them up and say, yeah, this is who they are. Like, in my field of study, like stories, just narratives, I know very well that when a story gets to a group of people before the people themselves connect, biases will be built.
Yeah.
So you have a story going way ahead than the actual experience, So curriculums, Kev. So that, I guess that's one thing that needs to be addressed. That's one thing that we need to look at and say, okay, how can something be done differently here? Correct? Would you agree with that?
And what assumptions is it coming from? That's a big piece, is curriculum that's written from a certain point of view will color it. So when I developed my curriculum as part of my thesis, I made sure that the part on Muslims, the part on Judaism, I actually sent those to people of that faith and be like, okay, am I doing this correctly? Am I expressing this in a way that you would want that expressed? And so I made sure that even though I had the graduate degree, I made sure that my Christian lens wasn't filtering how I would say the religion opposed to somebody of that actual faith.
Yeah.
And that's another key part, is when you understand the largest voice, you start to recognize that, have I tried to understand the Muslim with a Christian lens when those are not the same? Yeah. My favorite analogy that I use from one of the textbooks I had is from the book God is Not One, or Not God, All Gods Are the Same. Stephen Portho, I think is his name. And he uses the analogy of sports. Not all sports are the same, right? Sports have different rules, different goals, different mediums, different ways of doing things.
Yeah.
So whereas a Muslim and a Christian might talk about the idea of prayer, they might be using it differently, right? And so I challenge students that way. I'm like, well, hockey players and swimmers are both using water, therefore it's the same sport.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, they're not.
No.
But we do that to religion all the time. We say the same.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah.
Like salvation is a very different word in different religions. Not all religions use that word.
Yeah.
Sin, or even cross comparison. Like another famous one is like people think of the Quran. They're like, oh, that's like the Bible.
Yeah. Like, no.
It's not.
Yeah.
The Quran would be better understood in relation to Jesus because the Quran is the divine iteration. It came from God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was relayed through the Gabriel, the archangel. And so being aware that a word will be used very differently or the concept will look very different.
Yeah.
Hockey and soccer are both team sports.
Yeah.
But how many players? How big the field?
Yeah. How big is the ball they're using?
Right?
Oh.
They're both shooting something into a net, therefore they're the same. It's like, well, actually, when you look at it, soccer ball and a puck are very different.
Yeah, you say that, and I could imagine people watching this saying, "Did he just say hockey ball? It's a puck? Come on."
Yeah, but that clarification is so important.
My apologies.
Yeah,
hockey fans.
You're in Canada, though. You gotta be careful.
Do not write in the comments and crucify me. Yeah, I see that. I remember when I first saw something of this kind, Kev, I just thought, wait a second, what's happening here? You've probably seen it on the news, eh? Someone will be reporting, oh, this thing has happened in Africa, and now we're going to switch to New York to our African correspondents to tell us more about this issue. Come on. Get someone who's there, who belongs there, who is off the place, to tell you about their experience. Don't be telling me about what happened in Afghanistan and then you get someone in England to explain to me what is. It just doesn't make sense. I remember reading this somewhere that whenever the history of the deer is written by the lion, there's a problem.
Yeah, exactly. So what are our sources? And that often comes through relationship.
Yeah.
Right? And it becomes, if something happens on the other side of the world, such as Israel and Palestine, is a huge thing. Does that mean I should start hating my Israeli or Jewish neighbor in Canada, even though they may have never been to Israel?
Yeah.
We do that jump so easily. And it's unfortunate because Israel, in that area, is a different context. It's, but we want to fight that fight here in Canada, hating somebody who's our neighbor.
Yeah. When we don't understand the lived context of it. Yeah. So in the curriculum you've designed here, you're saying, hey, we're going to expose our students to the dominant voice in our worldview. But when it comes to the other voices, be it in world religion, where we're teaching them about Islam or, Buddhism or whatever it is, we are not going to take it upon ourselves to tell their story. We will get input from the people there to actually be in charge or have ownership of their own story.
Yeah.
That is a powerful thought, man.
Yeah, and so I did a lot of work to make sure that my sources were from actual sites of actual people from those actual religions.
Yeah.
So each faith tradition's introduced. I think BBC did it or some newslet out of England where they introduce and do the day in the life of a Jewish rabbi. They do a day in the life of a Christian priest, and so that's how I start each faith lesson. Is we look at the life of a leader in that religion in the way that they describe it.
Yeah.
And then we look at the story, because sometimes truths are too big and need a story, as Dr. Ray once said. And I really like that. So there's a lot of storytelling from those people of that faith.
Yeah.
And of course, the curriculum does invite, field trips to those areas, whether to a Sikh temple or synagogue, trying to create like, I don't know your story, but I want to understand it. Even if we find disagreements, we can still live well. We can still be nice. We can still understand that we're in this country. We're both Canadian citizens. It goes to that area very easily once I acknowledge that I don't know your story. I don't own your story. And that my story is different. Yeah. And that's hard work. But I think it's what's required for democracy. I think it's what's required for my Christian view to love well. I think this is I root this obviously in my Christian experience. Yeah. Of when Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. To me, that's a huge emphasis on, well, I know myself quite well. I know my story. So if I'm going to translate that into, I need to know your story so I can love you in that same way. Yeah. And so that's a huge key part for me is story driven from that actual faith, from their sources, from their view. How would they want to describe it? Yeah, yeah. I love what you just said. Sometimes the truths we want to share are so big, they're better off encapsulated in a story. Yeah. The ancients have done that for forever. Yeah. It's always encapsulated in a story. And that just makes it more palatable. And if you don't get it now, it might just even do the work in the background. Yeah, and we remember stories differently. Yeah. It's a different part of our brain as well. So stories stay with us, stories evolve in us. We start to think along the lines of those stories. When we had the instructor come from, the Islamic instructor come, she was a Sufi, part of the Sufi tradition. Yeah. She started the class right away paralleling her story, her difficult pregnancy with the story of Mary from the Quran. That's how she began her lesson. We're all like, whoa. But she's like, guys, I want to take you to the fullness of this. Yeah. So we could be there and understand it. Wow. Yeah. And so she was doing that. She was relaying her story in parallel and understanding through another story. Yeah. And obviously I still remember that 6 years later. Yeah. Right? Because it was encapsulated in a story. And you could... So, Kev, tell me about... Because I think somewhere in chapter 3 of your thesis where you then introduce the student's urgency to this process. Like, you're honoring the urgency of the student. Talk to us about it. What's that? What does it look like? Kids aren't dumb, and they shouldn't be treated as such. That could be the tagline. Kids are not dumb. No, they are not. They should not be treated as such. And I wish that was true of mine. Oh, they'll kill me when they hear. Because again, this curriculum is designed for high school. Yeah. Like, I did adapt it for my middle school class and kind of brought it to their understanding. But kids are not stupid. And when it comes to religion, I just have seen so many examples of them being underserved. When I was in Bible college, my Bible instructor gave 2 key principles of teaching Bible, and then I have another third one from my high school Bible teacher. Yeah. So the first one is don't teach more than they can handle. But then on the flip side, teach enough that they can learn. Don't underserve it. Don't cut it out. Yeah. Don't teach something that they have to unlearn later in life. Ooh, that's a big one. Because unlearning is far more difficult than learning. Yeah. And I've done a lot of writing in that area too, of deconstruction. Some of that is the fault of bad teaching. Yeah. And then the third one is you cannot do the work of the divine or the spirit for the kid. And so I've seen those 3 principles broken so often where I need you to do this. And then, there's a kind of a panic, kind of like, I need you to be baptized. And well, no, that's not my work. No. That's your journey. Where like I've had students, when I come to teach Bible, they're like, yeah, we were grade 12 students. We were watching VeggieTales last year. I'm like, that was your religious education? And they're like, yeah, VeggieTales. Yeah. For 18-year-olds. I'm like, we're going to move past that. And they were so excited. And an agency is a keyword I use of allowing kids to have their opinion, allowing kids to understand within their own story. allowing kids to disagree.
Wow.
Right? I had students, because I taught in a Christian school setting, that absolutely hated the church that ran the school. And they're members of that church. They grew up in that church.
Yeah.
But once they knew I wasn't out to get them, they could bring out their full story. And we can honor it. I mean, there's many times in their stories I recognize my own growing up in the church system as well. Like, oh yeah, that's still a problem, eh?
Yeah.
And when you honor their agency, when you honor their ability to reason within their setting, obviously our brains don't develop until early 20s.
True.
But they still have a brain.
Yeah.
They're still processing. They're still bringing in their information, and they're still understanding, okay, what's my role in this faith? What's my role in this school? How do I make friends? And when you honor that by saying, here's what we're going to learn. And I remember telling my students when I first was teaching them that you can disagree with me and get a good grade. I mean, that shocked half of them. Like, wait, what?
Yeah.
I'm like, no, I'm not here to make you a clone, but I am here to engage your brains, which you guys have told me have not been engaged the last couple of years in this, in religious education or spiritual, so how are we going to do that?
Yeah.
And so a key difference I make too is between confessional and non-confessional.
Yeah. Talk to us about that. Yeah.
So confessional is geared towards affirming a doctrine, affirming a now I can't speak.
Ah, there you go. Yeah.
A certain stance.
It's contagious.
Yes. A certain stance on something.
Yeah.
Non-confessional is experiential, still knowledge, but you don't have to affirm.
Yeah.
I can learn about Islam, but not have to affirm that it's correct. Right?
Yeah.
Obviously, as a Christian, I view Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a key figure.
Yeah.
But I don't hold him to the same way that a Muslim would.
Yeah.
And I recognize and affirm that. And I have Muslim friends who know that I'm all about Jesus.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's a huge piece as well, is that we can be friends, we can be, teacher, student, you can still get a good grade, even if you don't agree.
Yeah.
I need to know why you disagree and honor your process. That's where my grading and kind of assessment went, is how are you thinking through this? And then students would relay their story. And through that experience, I would have the same thought too.
So are you saying our education should be non-confessional?
Especially in the Christian school setting.
Yeah.
The school I was at and school system I was part of often admitted non-Christians or people of other faiths.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're only of that church. But even then, it's, well, what if these kids don't accept it? What if they disagree with the church or the predominant voice?
Yes.
Does that mean they have less value or they should get a less of a grade? And I argue, of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not. Their value is intrinsically there, even through disagreements.
That's a big point, man. That's yeah.
And in Christianity, we would say the image of God. We have all these verses, all these ways of describing people's beauty apart from their action of just being, beloveds. And then we act not in that way.
Yeah.
Or we do not teach in that way.
Yeah. There's a part in your thesis where, again, I think we've touched on this, where you're saying we're going to value participation over agreement. Engage. Let's build community together. Let me hear who you are, where you're from, how you see the world, and be a part of this. We might not agree on things, but I feel like when we do that, Kev, when I get to know you at that level, I also grow. I see the world in a different way, So, Kev, before we wrap this show up, man, is there something that we didn't talk about here that you feel like, what, this is big. This is a key thing in this entire thing. Like I said, we will try and put a link to your thesis so people can engage with it. I actually think that if it were possible, we should just send this to all religiously affiliated schools and, whatever organizational structure they have, so they can engage with this, because you did great work here.
Well, thank you.
This is great work. So is there anything we left out here?
Well, it's just a reminder of the damage of fear. I keep coming back to the role fear plays in community building, in recognizing and affirming, because we have a big fear-based society right now, it seems. And we let that get in the way of beauty. One of the questions I've asked is, why does it take natural disasters for a community to get along? Right? Like my hometown, Kelowna, has almost burnt down multiple times. And in those moments, you see beautiful community. You see people opening up their doors. You see the Jewish synagogue doing things. You see the Muslims participating with it's just wonderful. And I'm like, this is great. But
why did it take a disaster?
Why did it take a forest fire for us to be this way?
Yeah.
And I think if we can build relations in peace, it will withstand the storms of war and strife and misinformation.
Yeah.
But we seem to externalize our need to understand community to the hard times. It shouldn't take a forest fire, an earthquake, or a tsunami for me to know my neighbor.
Yeah.
Right. But that seems to be the trend, and I'm hoping that we can remove the fear. We can remove sometimes the pride. You know, if you feel like you have all the answers, you probably don't.
Yeah.
If somebody has all the answers when it comes to the unknowable divine, I would like to hear them out.
Yeah.
Right. And so tackling pride, tackling fear, so we can live well, we can live peacefully, we can honor those around us, and we can tackle issues like homelessness. We can tackle issues once we figure out our relations. That empowers us to tackle bigger things.
True.
But
that is huge, man. That is huge.
Yeah, and this is a movement we can start at individual level. You can start understanding your neighborhood. You can start introducing yourself to neighbors. You can, I don't know about this religion. Teach me.
Yeah.
Right? And that's an individual thing we can daily do. And the way that it will fold out and balloon out into society or education or to our kids who will take the future. I mean, that's awesome.
That is awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like how we often say it in this podcast here, turns out things are not as black and white as people would like them to be. So thank you for coming out, Kev.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, brother.